All right, let me welcome Michelle. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
How are you? How's it out there? 105 in
It
Las Vegas?
is humid. It feels like Virginia.
Oh yeah, because it's monsoon season, so you're gonna start getting some rain, huh?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
I've been having thunderstorms, so
Yeah. And LA, my goodness, I heard they got actually somebody was killed on the beach there. That's probably the first time in history there's been a lightning strike in Southern California. Yep. And Peter,
yeah.
how are you doing?
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Great, welcome. So we had 15 enroll, and I've been sort of picking them off one by one on the phone over the past several days. So I'm not expecting a big turnout, which is good because we can concentrate on your cases. So that's what I'll do. We can usually run up to 4 microphones without it becoming some feedback issues. So I'll try to leave them open so we can have a dialogue. And I've got a couple of things going. First is my agenda. So tell me, Peter, can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Great. And how about you, Michelle? Michelle, can you see my screen? Hello.
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay, good. And Lee?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Usually I have the mics closed because of the feedback, but because there's just a small group, they're all open. So if you need to talk to a kid or something, just let me know. Can you self mute up from there with
I
this
did,
number?
yeah.
Yeah, you can.
Mhm.
Okay. So good. All right. And I think Michelle just did. So if you take a look at the agenda, we're in the introduction purpose of the session. I'll take another couple of minutes with that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship of the methods to the IRB request for review. It's been in the print material. I've given individual feedback on the matter, but it's something that is continuing need for people to understand that. And so I'll take a bit of time with that. And then I'm going to put a sample IRB on the page and talk about what seems to be working. And then we'll break down your cases as people turn up. So that is the plan. Lee will know this, and Peter, but Michelle, we've had a really tragic event here in Saco in the last 2 days. And a family of five was a murder suicide. The dad killed the three kids and the mom about a mile from my house right here in Saco. Uh, the community is pretty fragile and it's been a really rough few days. And I find myself, I think partly because I'm a parent of two teenagers, being very conscious of just how fragile and difficult things can be for folks. So I just wanted to say that going in. That's kind of a local thing that I think they did get actually in the national press, but it's affected me quite heavily. So I just wanted to name that as we start. Um, General overview.
Well,
So
I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't
yeah,
hear.
thank you, Michelle. Yeah, it's domestic violence at its worst, and the tragedy is that the mental health support is not in place for families. And Peter, that's his expertise, and so family and clinical and outreach, and maybe not mental health specifically, but it really brings to mind the challenges of how such a wealthy country cannot take care of its own people. I think so. My thought for the day. Thank you. So the general overview, methods, and IRB. As I've explained a couple of times, some doctoral programs or masters with theses require the IRB to be filed first before the proposal is presented. Others require the proposal to be presented and confirmed, and then the IRB request to take place. There's arguments for both approaches. To reiterate in about 3 minutes, I chose the former, which is to have people work on the IRB, and if it's sufficiently tidy, to push it over to our IRB board, to our the institution review board folk, so that particularly if it's exempt, they can check it off, and you know that you can move forward with refining your proposal. The downside of that is if the protocol changes radically, or the way the questions or the survey format is structured, um, somehow needs to be revisited, we then as a team have to make the call whether to do an amended IRB. Now, the IRB folk are very clear about the fact they don't critique the quality of the study. So that's sort of good news and bad news. It can be pretty funky and not well thought out, but if nobody's in harm's way, they pass it. They might look at it askance and say, well, this isn't a very thoughtful study. That data is not going to get them what they want to learn. But the fact of the matter is, that's not their job. Their job is to protect the participants from us, the researchers, and that's what they do. So if there's an ethical concerns, people being asked to declare, expose whatever materials that are not considered appropriate, if the subjects, him or herself, are protected class, then they take action. So in some cases, those two intersect. For example, he gave a pretty terrific outline, I think, when he was on our webinar a few weeks ago, and that is a person interviewing a minor about sexual activity or behaviors. Well, there's a couple of problems with that in terms of the ethics of it. So that raises a red flag for the IRB, and that really is a protocol issue. It's not just, so it is a quality of study and protocol issue. So I wanted to touch on that and to say that we made it a strategic call to have you work on the IRB along with the proposal so that you could unpack the IRB forms. In this case, we're looking at review, request for review. And then as you went in and out of your methods section, the methods would be refined and made more succinct as the IRB was completed. So it is a bit iterative. I don't think it's particularly redundant, but there is a bit of back and forth, and we're very aware of that. It's kind of the nature of the process. It just brings in the preparation for the IRB sort of midway instead of just having it be sort of an afterthought, oh, I'll just get this checked off. It actually becomes part of the work of the thinking and a container for that thinking process in a way that it doesn't so much when it's done post the proposal meeting. So I just wanted to put that out. Any questions about the nature of IRB first versus the methods section and the proposal review from any of the three of you?
No.
Peter? Okay. Lee or Michelle?
No,
Okay.
I'm fine.
All right. So I think, let's see, Peter, let me just pull you in since your mic is open and I was just looking at your stuff. Peter's in my last exchange had to do with the synthesis, the part of the synthesis process in his lit review. So Peter, just as a 60-second check-in, are you okay with where you and I left off on that matter?
Regarding the literature review.
Yes, yeah, I think I kind of gave you a miscue, and I just want to make sure that you're okay with that.
Well, no, actually, what that was specifically was the conceptual framework.
That's right.
That's one question.
Yeah, yeah.
And because I kept coming back, it seemed like in the outline, the conceptual framework was underneath every chapter. Mm-hmm. And I was just confused in how to rewrite.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yes. So I didn't really respond to you because I didn't understand that was your question. So we'll take that. We'll take that up. Just briefly, in terms of the nature of the outline, that I have actually comes from my previous program and one of my colleagues there. The conceptual framework can appear multiple times. It's primarily introduced in the introduction, meaning here's some research that we're going to consider. It's developed and supported in the lit review, and that informs the methods. So its job is different in each case. I don't know if that's helpful. I certainly didn't put that in my email because I didn't understand the question. So we can maybe talk more about that after we finish up with the other folks here. Okay,
no, that's perfect. Yeah.
All right. The area where I've seen the major challenge is the scope of presentation in the protocol. So I'll just touch on this, but again, because there's just a few of you, we can work on your cases. We don't need to spend a lot of time giving generalizations. This is one of the earlier presented protocols. Here's number 16. To reiterate, there are two forms people generally start with. One is a request for exemption. One is the request for review. The request for review content here in part 16 and the headings that appear in the other form, request for exemption, are almost parallel. For that reason, Liam, who's our expert over there, and I made the decision to go ahead and primarily encourage people to do the request for review, knowing that the headings in part 16 were pretty parallel and that the attachments are still required. So there's not a lot of shortcut in that other form. Have any of you spent some time with the request for exemption?
Well, I didn't. Not specifically. I just kind of went through and filled it out like it would not be exempted.
Yeah. I took this, I did the assignment both ways as well when I was trying to make the decision how to structure this course in the way that would be the most efficient use of people's time. And again, in consultation with Liam, we agreed that there's a bit less to do on the request for exemption, but it's not always clear if you'll be exempt, and the material is almost the same. And if the request for exemption is not approved, then they have to reach back out to you to get more stuff. So I thought, okay, is that iterative process at that point more troublesome than just putting the material together up front? And I also believe that everything in the request for review, this main form, appears in your methods anyway, or in some kind of appended material. So that's that piece. In terms of format, I think the three of you are in the second round of editing your IRB. If you look at my screen, right underneath 16 research protocol, red letters important, the following guidelines. In every case, you are welcome to delete those bolded instructions as you complete your entries or your revisions. You don't have to delete the material that's bolded. It simplifies things for the reader and it takes less inches of electronic paper. But that's something he talked to me about a ways back, and I didn't worry about it too much because I thought it was not the most important thing we were trying to accomplish. But if you're in the midst of editing your IRB application, feel free to delete this section here, which I'm now making blue. So in every box, every major box, there are bold instructions, and you're welcome to delete those instructions as you complete. So that's a little heads up. The scope of Karina's background, aims, and significance is pretty centered. So I chose this one because particularly this has been a challenge for people to determine, without a lot of direction from the IRB, how much detail to put in the background, specific aims and significance. So this is one of the two samples that I put in the discussion board about the second week. It's still there along with a second one. So there's two samples of IRBs there should you need to check those. And you can see that Karina's is about, I'm going to scroll kind of slow so nobody gets seasick. It's about 2 pages with this format. Well, not even 1 page, single spaced, fairly small font. This is 8. So this would be a full page if it were a larger font. So I wanted to just review briefly that the review of the lit does not need to be extensive. It just needs to send a signal to the committee or the board in this case that the work you're doing is based on some existing research. You didn't just think it up, sort of driving your car to work kind of thing. Okay, people do. All right. So procedures, compensation costs, these are all fairly simple. Again, the board's job is to ensure the safety of the participants. So they want to know who the participants are and in what capacity they'll engage in the study. That's really what they care most about, and that the content of the study is not anything that really puts them at risk ethically. So once you spend some time messing around with this material, it all starts to make sense. But the first time through any sort of IRB process, it can be sort of complexifying, and sometimes not very obvious what they're looking for. So here's an example of that. Provisions to maintain confidentiality of data. Now, this is an area where almost everything we've sent over there so far has gone through. And yet, Liam and I discussed this business of electronic data and the whole email business, and the fact that IRB boards until, what, I don't know, Michelle will be able to tell us the answer to this, 15 years ago, maybe? I mean, email is now 20 years old. There was still this notion that you'd have a paper transcript and lock it in a file drawer. Michelle, is that true? She's going to have to unmute to answer this question.
Yes,
yeah. Michelle, tell our two colleagues, they may know you from being in other groups with you, but tell us in 25 words or less what your day job is.
my day job is a bump. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a senior analyst, so I do a lot of instructional design, and I work as a computer consultant as well.
Right, and I met Michelle when she was still here at
UNI. Network security issues.
Yeah. Yeah, so tell us a little bit, when you think about electronic data, so let's say we've got a transcript where the interviewer has interviewed someone on the telephone or face-to-face, they've made an audio recording, they've transcribed it into some form of print, and they attach it to an email and send it somewhere. That is not a secure document. Would you say? Michelle?
No, it's not unless you encrypt it.
Yeah.
It is not secure unless you encrypt the email and have a electronic sign-off on it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, that's similar to anything that we send, any medical data.
Yeah. Well, I think the HIPAA
I guess
people,
I'm
the medical
interpreting
folks,
this number 9.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I think, Peter, you folks are way ahead of most social scientists because you're used to handling confidential data on a very regular basis. Whereas I think people in social sciences starting maybe 10 years ago started to realize they needed to take electronic steps to manage confidential data. Now, somebody telling a story about how they chose to take a certain course or what their decision was about something to do with an academic setting that's fairly a non-sensitive material, people get a little lackadaisical, I think. They think, well, they're not talking about something that should be kept confidential necessarily, so I don't have to be quite as careful. So one of our jobs, I think, as instructors and as peer support people is just to remind folks that they need to state clearly how they will handle people's information or interviews, whether it's extremely sensitive information or sort of more generic type information. Liam told me, Michelle, about an iron key, and this is a thumb drive that comes with a confidentiality or protective sort of electronic mechanism. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, it's an encryption thumb drive that you can purchase for a few extra dollars from the regular thumb drive. Mm-hmm. And when you save the document, you can save it as encrypt. But the key is, if you save it as encrypt, you have to have your password. And if you forget the password, then your documents are pretty much gone.
So, that's what he told me. He said you better write down your password in 3 places.
So it's like a double-edged sword there. Are you protecting the data? Are you protecting it so much that you can't even see it yourself?
Protect it from yourself, the researcher.
Well, I mean, I'm using a Mac, so for Mac, it's the same concept as the keychain and the Mac, that if you put it as a file vault in your Mac and you encrypt it, if you forget your password, then all your files that you save in the file vault are all encrypted. You can't get out of it because whatever you try to retrieve doesn't make sense anymore.
It sounded a little dicey to me, to be honest, because when I was talking to Liam, I thought, I'd be the one who'd have the wrong password and I would lose all my data. So,
right.
I'm going to go. Thank you for weighing in. I just, because I have you on the line, I can draw upon your expertise. This investigator conflict of interest, this has been very interesting in our cohort. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm trying to think of the 3 that are here, and knowing what I do about your studies thus far, I don't see an obvious conflict of interest, but I am going to have you 3 weigh on this because I think it's a very interesting piece. If there's any perception that the interviewer or researcher has any sort of authority or coercive potential over the participants for any reason, the IRB flags it. And a couple of examples in our cohort, people were going to collect some data on colleagues with their permission. And a couple of cases, there was a person in authority who was wanting to interview staff who report to that person. The IRB people generally will work with that, but they're rightly careful. So I want to just say that what I'm hearing when I talk to our colleagues and say, so this is be the perception, oh, well, we're really good friends and we work closely together and whatever. And so I have to remind them, the board doesn't know you and your people, and you can't guarantee that there'll be protection against some sort of coercion. So you have a first-year teacher, the principal wants to interview her, and the principal says, well, here's this consent letter or assent letter, and you don't have to participate. Well, it's May, and the retention letters are going around, or it's March, the pink, we call them pink copy. The letter would come out for reviewing your contract for the next year. That person may not feel safe saying, I don't want to be part of your study, and I hope you rehire me for next year. So you, as the person in authority and with some confidence, may feel like you'll be equitable and treat people fairly, and that you've written down the terms in this letter. That doesn't mean the person won't feel coerced or have some concerns about participating. So I wanted to touch on that while we had number 11 on the screen. I don't know the three of your studies. Yeah, Peter, jump in, huh?
Yeah, no, I'm just sort of one concern of mine is that I guess to some degree what I'm hoping to do is a participatory or some sort of action research, which includes patients and providers, I'm one of those. So would that be, considered coercive if I am a provider for these patients?
I believe, knowing what I do about your study, that you can frame your materials and the protocol in a way that will be supported by the board. So maybe what we can do as we finish up with the other two folks is you can stay on the line and we can talk through, where you've got to with your protocol. To give Lee and Michelle a little more context, describe the roles of the participants in your cases. So you have like several case studies in mind of these folks from different roles trying to improve the patient's efficacy, I guess I would say, as part of a team and trying to get medical provision. Why don't you say a little more about it?
Yeah, so it's actually doing a survey on all the providing teams and a sample, or I guess a sample of patients that fall within the certain criteria, then interviewing the patients to see what works best, what do they need, what would work better, et cetera. So, and then I'm going to cross-reference some data in the surveys and hopefully create some sort of robust feedback system that we can then sort of do a quality improvement cycle on in accordance to the feedback I get from the providers and the patients.
Right. So in the case of my understanding of the board's likely recommendations is that the professionals that are providing will not be protected class in any case, and that they have some autonomy in terms of their roles and responsibilities. So they don't work for you as the facilitator of the research. In terms of the patient, I know that generally the HIPAA materials and medical settings are pretty on it in terms of what is required for protecting patient confidentiality. So if you were to follow your professional guidelines about what patients can and cannot be asked to do, my guess is that UNE's IRB will respect that as you having met the criteria. That's my assumption. In what we want to do in your case, I think, though, is get a draft of that protocol together and the questions pretty quickly so we can get that over to
Sure.
Liam. So even if you're not quite there, why don't you go ahead and send those along? I don't know if you posted in the last 2 days anything on the IRB.
It's funny because I apologize. I spaced the fact that you needed the supplementary material, so I just
Okay,
posted
I was going to say,
instead.
so for some yours is on. I have my checklist right here. And the Peter line is that I haven't sent it over, so there's a reason. So if you want to, I think your attachments maybe need to be just added into this form we're looking at.
And
when I say attachments,
what I
mean
did was I sent you appendix. Yeah,
okay.
I attached all of my forms and recruitment language and all of that stuff. I just sent it, put it on Blackboard.
Okay, good. Yep. All right. So let me take a look at that in the next day or two, and then if it's close enough, I'll have Liam take a look, and then we'll know where we stand on that. That'd be good.
Okay.
So
wonderful.
That's a good example then, and particularly Lee has made a shift in her focus, and she's going back around with her lit reviews. So let me just use Peter as an example here, Lee, that in Peter's case, he has persisted with this plan and is now bringing in sort of additional documentation to allow me to make the case that the IRB does meet the protocol. When I send those materials over to Liam, I also will look at his proposal again. Sorry to speak about you in the third person, Peter, and do some reconciliation. So is where he started with his methodology pretty much what's in the IRB. That's the protocol. That's the gist of the questions. They don't have to be exact, but you certainly want to be within range so that it's, again, you're making a decision about ethics. Then, and now, Peter, we can speak one-to-one here. What's important is the second part of the process is, will the data you garner answer the question? And sometimes the IRB is pretty good, but the nature of how the person
could you say that again? I missed that whole last piece.
Sure. So the IRB can be adequate, meaning it identifies the participant group clearly. It shows how permission will be granted for any interviewing or survey. So the IRB is, let's say, 90% there. And then you go back to the proposal, and there's some missing pieces. And again, this is the nature of having people step into the IRB earlier than later. So again, there's an upside and a downside. And that's when I've done the research with other programs. Right. This is what I've been curious about. So where's the benefit and where's the challenge? So for example, if you have you have a protocol that's considered ethical by the board, and then you and I and your other members of your committee look at your proposal and say, well, we're glad that your IRB is in good order. However, what exactly are you going to do when you analyze this data? So there's another piece of the protocol that goes to the next round. And while let's go see if we got the data analysis here. Interpretation of data. While the IRB asks about how you're going to interpret data, they again are looking to protect the participants. They're not asking, will this be really useful data? And will the researcher be able to write up a pretty good set of findings and recommendations? They all hope you can, because it's a lot of your time and money doing this. Okay. But they're not required to dust it off and make sure it works. We, as your committee, are. So that's, again, why it feels kind of toing and froing and why I wanted to get to this piece of the puzzle. So in your case, Peter, your cases, if you identify a handful, and we won't say a number at the moment, although I think it's in your materials, of patients that have multiple providers, and you're able to get everybody's perceptions on the matter, will you carry your data as findings and therefore recommendations for how the providers can improve and how the patient might behave? What is your hope to do with this data when you get
it? Pretty much to improve system workflows, and it's one, and to create new protocols and tools within the electronic health record that are more useful. So those are the two things. One is to somewhat have the generalizability of this whole thing is what's kind of bugging me, but that's okay, because I really want it to be somewhat generalizable. But I think if I can come up with some sort of for this data that we glean from the interviews and the surveys to inform workflow improvement and electronic health record tools improvement, for lack of better words.
Yeah. So one thing about these types of studies and the notion of generalizability, I think of that term in small and uppercase. So uppercase generalizability is what the statisticians mean using words like significance and those kinds of terms in the stat world, where you can prove almost beyond a shadow of a doubt. You can demonstrate, let me do that your sample size of 100 represents a larger group of the same class or type of participant that's 10,000. And this 100 is like the Nielsen ratings approach. The Nielsen ratings look at 1,300 families or whatever it is. They're supposed to be representative of all Americans, which probably is a very flawed assumption, but that's how they play it. And the sample can be generalized because a lot of care has been taken to prove that the 100 in the sample are truly representative of the 10,000 or the 230 million or whoever, how many people watching TV. There's a lot of flaws in those assumptions, but that's what generalizability means in research. That you have so carefully crafted and selected your sample that you can legitimately say this sample represents a larger population. So once you've moved away from that very specific discipline of statistical sampling, generalizability then is sort of taken off the table. Well, you can't generalize from Peter's 5-patient case study that this is true for every patient and every team. You can, however, make some pretty legitimate recommendations that probably are useful to the majority of clinics and hospitals who have the similar kinds of problems that you're identifying, which is most of them. So it may not be statistically generalizable, but it is content-wise probably useful and generalizable small g to quite a few providers. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. No, that's a very clear description. So
okay.
Thank you.
So when you run across generalizability in the qual versus quant,
that was pretty much my my concern.
Yeah. So what you can do in these kinds of studies is you can say this. The way I call it pseudo generalizability, which I don't know if I'd be allowed to do that in a stat course. But what that means in my frame is that if you're multiple providers serving a patient is a fairly common model of healthcare provision, then the nature of what you're learning is in fact useful and generalizable to a point. That's kind of the pseudo business that statistically maybe not, but in terms of usefulness, probably yes. So, okay. So interpretation of data, when we go back to your proposal, then we're asking if the person is able to get the data they seek, they get a pretty good return, they interview their 5 or 10 people, they start to do some analysis, are they going to find what they're looking to learn about? And that's where we go after you get your IRB together and mostly meet the basics so we can have your review, like Peter and I just went back and forth. Then we want to make sure the study holds together. So it's not as if one leads to the other in a simple way. There's a bit of circularity to it. And both steps have to happen. The protocol has to be reasonable and ethical, and the study has to be useful. And in some ways, that order of what gets reviewed is less important. They do have to serve each other, but they don't have to be. It's not always linear. The process is not always linear. Michelle, can you open your mic? I'm going to pull you in here, and then we're going to go back to Lee. So, Michelle, give us a little bit of an update on your study and who you are talking to about what.
I'm actually bringing my new boss in because he had an EDD and he had been through this process, and he's the director of e-learning. He is also chairing a couple of committee, professional organization committee. So I'm actually trying to wrap up my proposal and send a copy over to him so we can have a schedule meeting and discuss about it. And he reports to the VP for academic success. So I'm pretty certain that I'm getting very strong support for both of them with my studies. And they also have connections to UNLV and other community colleges and professional organizations with these community colleges. So those are the folks that I am in the process of getting my proposal to. That's why I'm trying to wrap up my proposal as fast as I can.
So we need to make sure that it hangs together and the protocol is reasonable in terms of the veracity of the protocol. It needs to be good so that you get the data you want and that your colleagues don't look at it and say, what? What are we doing here? All right. So you and I can do that. That'll be good. In terms of surveys and sending out surveys versus talking to people, can you say a little more about that to our colleagues that are on the line here? You're looking at MOOCs, which they may already know or not know.
Right. Yeah, they already know because they are in the. They were. My boss actually was in the process when Nevada State had the consultant in to do the study about whether to move forward with MOOCs or not.
Okay.
So he's pretty familiar with that, and and of course the VP for academic success. He also is very interested in looking at this because that means retention potential for MOOCs folks if we are to go towards MOOCs. And also the my study will also hang quite a bit with the study of online learning too, and we're trying to do studies on the student success rate with online learning and what resources we also need for online learning. So everything seems to be fitting together pretty well. It's just a matter of getting all the paper together, all the written form together.
So Michelle's lit review, Lee and Peter, focuses on different types of online learning and colleges or higher educators administering online learning, and particularly with a focus on MOOCs, which, as she states in her lit review, it's been kind of the Wild West out there. Would you say, Michelle? You know what I mean by Wild West?
That is correct.
Yeah. So it's like everybody had to have MOOCs, and people got hired and fired, and it was really a fabulous idea. And other places just shut them down because they couldn't figure out a financial model that would work. So there's a lot of sort of chaotic financial and policy stuff that went on around MOOCs. And her goal has been to both acknowledge that, because she's working for an administrative team that's trying to make decisions about resources, but to drill down and look more closely at whether institutions really are providing PD for faculty and those kinds of things. So who's in your participant group, Michelle? Who are not your boss and stuff, who are you actually going to survey? She muted her mic. You're muted there, Michelle. There we go. Talk about who you're going to survey who are your participants in your study.
I got it.
Okay.
I'm actually going to survey faculty, student, and staff, and instructional technology staff from community colleges in California and Arizona. and leave the folks at my school alone. And when I get the data, that's my plan is to pass that data along. So I'll be studying other schools. So politically, I am not in trouble with my current work environment.
Yeah, that was
I
a
think
wise.
it'll be a good.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a good support too if I see other schools have more or less resources and look at the success rate.
Yeah.
So this way we can use those data to help ourselves with where we want to go.
Yeah. When your IRB comes back with the revisions and your proposal, I'm going to take it. I'm going to shop it around a couple of people at UNE without your name on it. So given that you used to work for us, and I don't want to engage you in having to worry about confidentiality issues, but I'm going to ask them to critique the questions, given you've got multiple multiple roles responding to those questions, just in terms of how the questions will work with the different audiences. And then if you want to talk about the statistical part, I've got somebody queued up for that as well. So that's kind of where you are, I think, with that. All right. So Lee, let me have you open your mic and come back in. And then I think we will have reviewed your 3 cases and we can start to close up. Lee, if you're online there, go ahead and unmute and come back in and we'll talk a little bit about your project. Peter, how's your timing for doing your actual, let's see, you're unmuted, for actually starting to conduct once you get your proposal meeting together? What's your timeline? Oh, Lee might not have audio. Oh, Lee's mic won't. Okay, not to worry, Lee. Let me finish up with Peter and Michelle and excuse them, and then you and I can finish up and give you a few minutes to sort out your mic. So, Peter, are you set knowing that you and I have just discussed that you've submitted all your attachments, and I'm going to push those over to Liam?
Yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
Super. All right, so let me make that round by the end of the week. I will have looked at your stuff, looked back at your current draft of your proposal, unless you've made any changes since I sent you edits, which I don't know if you have.
The proposal, yes.
Okay, are you working on that right now?
You could use that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm constantly working on it.
That's fine, but the methods is pretty close.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, and based on this conversation, I feel like I'm clear about what's going on in case Liam should come up. Although he generally reaches right out to the researcher. He doesn't come through me. He'll reach back to you and say, clarify this point or whatever. So you'll hear from Liam next, unless I see something in the attachments that I think needs tweaked. All right, Peter, I'm going to excuse you and appreciate so much that you came up tonight. And wish you well. We're going to have a good weekend. Nice weather.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Nice weather.
Yeah. Let's give Lee a few minutes, Michelle, to sort out her microphone. And while she's doing that, Lee, you might have to go out and come back in. Sometimes with audio, that's the only solution, I'm afraid to tell you. Michelle, so where did you and I leave off for editing? Do you have your proposal that I reviewed? Have you done another round of that?
Yes, I have that, and I am in the process of cleaning that up.
Okay, so keep it and keep working on it. On the IRB, do I have a version back? No, Wednesday. You asked through Wednesday. Right. So you're on the same schedule as Peter. Whatever you send
you say to me. I'm missing an attachment.
Is that in my notes?
Yeah, I sent you all the documents with attachments. Yeah, you say I'm missing an attachment for a certain question, and I need to look that over.
Okay.
I believe you say number 11.
Number 11 on this form.
In the question 11 in the IRB.
All right, let me look and see what's 11.
Yeah.
I can go get your IRB if I have to. So let me just see what we can. It's on my laptop. Experience conflict of interest. Do you have permission to access? Do you need to get it HR data? You don't, do you? You're just doing survey, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if there's another 11, because I don't see that you need an attachment to deal with experience. Do you have your CV? I thought I saw that
Yeah, the
go by.
CV was
Yeah, that was
yeah,
there.
the CV was there.
I don't know about conflict of interest. Oh, I think I know what I was thinking. Let me run this by you and see if it makes sense. You report to this vice
Okay.
president.
Right,
And I
indirectly,
think
yes.
one of my early ethical issues was that you're probably perceived as sitting next to God. Is that true?
No.
Okay. Are you perceived as sitting
No,
close in to the
because
administrative team?
my study is gonna be no, because my subjects are gonna be not gonna be on the local site. It's gonna
That's
be
right. And
offsite.
I think initially I thought you were studying some of your internal people as well. So I don't
Yeah,
see
I
that you have
decided
any,
not to.
yeah. Oh, maybe that's what happened. So this is a good thing. So I don't see a conflict of interest with you having to be
Okay.
both an administrator and in any potential way that you could use your participant data internal to your organization. So if you're just going outside, if you're going outside of your community college, that should resolve that problem. If that was it, that was fine.
Okay.
Michelle, can you be so kind as to embed
Okay.
all your documents in one long document?
Okay.
That makes my
So
job.
you don't want them to be separate documents?
Yeah, put everything, just paste it in there. It's a Word doc. And then electronic signature. Have you, so on here's, I learned, I think I put this in the course a couple of times, but since I've got you on the phone, see where Karina has just used a cursive font here on her signature. That is allowed in the state of Maine if you're not using it to defraud. So put your name right on the form. You can use this, you can scan it in, or you can do this, and then send it to me. I sign it if I think it's there, and I forward it to IRB. So take the next few days. Don't worry about getting it done by even tomorrow. You can take through Friday, whatever it takes. You want it to be as concise as possible. You want your signature on it,
Right.
and you want the identification of the participants to be very transparent, so the IRB has all their questions answered.
Right. Okay.
Now, did I give you feedback on the nature of your questions?
No.
Okay. The survey.
Do I need to attach a copy of the proposal to the IRB as well?
No. You're embedding
Okay.
what this section 16 that we've gone over tonight with the significance in that.
Okay.
You want a short version, no more than about 300 words max.
Okay.
And that long section. Your surveys, the content of your surveys, can you remind me where those questions emerged from? Did you design this, or did you modify an existing survey?
I pretty much put the questions in myself. I designed that.
Okay. Did I give you any feedback on those questions on the last round of IRB?
No.
Were they in the IRB when you sent it?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Where I've been seeing the greatest challenge for people that are designing their own is survey construction, which I think you have some experience with. So when you review your questions that are going to go into this survey, put your survey construction hat on, use a resource or two if you need it, and make sure you're following the basic guidelines for if you're using forced choice, 5 questions so that, or 4 instead of 5, be consistent. Don't mix and match, strongly agree here, and then they have to disagree there. I mean, my memory is that you have some experience with survey construction.
Yes.
So use your skills, because if the survey, if I look at it and I think it's not well wrought, I'll either send it back to you, or I'll get you and me a consultant and I'll get a third opinion. But in your case, you have some experience with it. If you've got somebody in your shop that has done survey research, show it to them.
Yeah, actually, I'm planning to get that's why I want to get together with my boss. I'm planning to get all of this to him too, so he can give me feedback.
Great. Okay.
And help me to think through things differently from his point of view.
In your case, because it's you've got a disparate audience. You've got
Mm-hmm.
staffers, IT people, and you've got faculty, and you've got people. So I assume the top of your surveys, they identify their role. And I'm a faculty member, I'm whatever, yeah. So yeah, do take a lot of care with that survey, because that's the centerpiece of your research, and you want it to be exactly what you want to find out, and you want to be able to use. In your case, you've got enough that you're going to want to do some statistical analysis. So we want to make sure that the survey meets criteria. After you show it to your boss or your colleague who's working with you, and somebody with some survey construction experience, then you can send it along to me, or you can send it to me and let me shop it with a couple of people here while you're talking to your colleague. Maybe that would work better. Then we get some different opinions about how to construct that survey. And if we can get it really good, and you can use this, your dissertation would be sort of a pilot study of that survey. You might be able to invite other people to extend your study and to, take that survey to some other community colleges. So that could work well.
Sure.
Excellent. Okay, so stay in touch. I appreciate you showing up tonight. I'm going to see if we got Lee's mic here, and then you're set, Michelle.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. There you are. So while you are fooling around, this happens on this GoTo mechanism. Sometimes the audio just doesn't work, and the only way I've been able to solve it myself is to close out and come back in. So what I did while you were trying to get your mic together was I did one-to-ones with Peter and then Michelle. They've both been excused, so it's just us. Anything we took a few minutes before the session to check in. Is there anything that you'd like to talk a little more about while I have you on the phone here?
Honestly, I think I'm set. I think I had a fairly decent understanding of the document itself beforehand. Obviously, with things changing, it made it rough, but you did a nice job of walking me through some of the pieces that I was more curious about tonight, and talking with Michelle and with Peter. But I think I would have had a question about the piece in terms of whether it was a conflict of interest to do some of my interviewing in my previous role at the consortium, but I don't see that as a conflict now.
Right, because of your role.
So it's not my role anymore. But I think that, especially when I was on the steering committee for the main content literacy project, and monies were flowing their way, and I was on, I was in charge of that, it can get a little bit awkward. So that might have not been a freely offered, yes, I'll be involved necessarily.
Okay. And you're still planning, Lee, to interview 5 or 6 principals in positions?
I am. Okay. I am, yeah.
All right. So in your case for the IRB, when you delimit the case, what you're saying is principals who meet this criteria will be invited to interview.
Yes.
And so when you say what their characteristics are and why they've been chosen, it's both a strength to improve your methodology, that they are originally from the community, they've been working in the role for at least 5 years, whatever. I mean, you can characterize it any way you want. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. What's important is that you do it.
Yes.
So that's how you explain yourself as you go along. So if somebody says, well, how come you interviewed Peter, but you didn't interview Michelle? Then you can say, well, here's the criteria for the participants. Peter met the criteria and Michelle did, like that.
That's right.
So that's real important in your case study. And you can think about it as a case study of 6 principals, from a certain type of region who have returned to provide leadership for people in their, similar communities, and each of them as a case. And you can think of the 6 of them, should it be 6 when we all is said and done, as a case in which you present their sort of similarities and maybe differences. There's no need to show that these people have the same story, and that therefore it's a better study. That is not at all what you need to do. You've identified people that you think have a story to tell, and that how they're going to talk about their work informs the profession.
Yes.
That's all you need. There's no sort of proving anything. They're all going to say the same 3 things. Therefore, it's a better study. That's not at all what in an ethnography or this type of interview research that you need to do. But I just wanted to reassure you about that.
Yes, that is helpful, because I think for me, being someone born and raised down east and leading down east, the storytelling aspect itself is so important, and I really feel it's my obligation to let these folks tell some stories.
Now, in your methodology and your lit review, I will encourage you to look at the methodology research on narrative. There's I've got some in my own research that I'd be happy to send you.
I would love that.
Yeah, and
Please
I
do.
owe you, I found the critical incident piece. There's also some really interesting research on geography, or not geography of place. I'm trying to remember. I stumbled into this one day. It was so fascinating. It's research on how people's geographic and their community affiliations influence their decision making in their whole life. You know, it's called geography of place or something of place. I'll try to find it, and it really gets at, I think, what you're talking about, which is, you know, what does it mean to be of a place and bring your leadership back to it, as opposed to being from away and coming in. We
That's
see
right.
this.
And I think I had stumbled across the piece that you're speaking of, but if you would forward that again.
Yeah,
that
I'm going to poke around that, and then I'll send you a couple of my own recent articles that I've written, because I do quite a bit with narrative, and there's a whole field called autoethnography, where people sort of study themselves and their story, you know, as instructive. That'll have some, there's some useful stuff in there, but there's plenty of stuff on using narrative as a framework for research. And so you've got plenty of materials there. We just want to get you the good stuff, because there's no reason for you to wade through everything at this point.
Yeah, thanks. I really
All right,
appreciate
so I'll
that.
try to turn up a couple articles in the next few days and push them along.
Okay.
Great.
That would be wonderful.
All right. Well, you need to go to bed. I'm thinking you've had a rough several months, if not particularly the last month. So do take care of yourself and take it one day at a time. Okay.
Thank you for all of your help these last few weeks. I really appreciate it, Michelle.
Oh, you're welcome. My heart goes out to you. So hang in there.
Thank you.
Okay.
You have a nice night.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.